Hey guys, it's your girl Melissa. So today I want to discuss sexual trauma. Many of us suffer with different forms of sexual trauma. It's happening at a higher rate, and you can watch this happen and unfold as you talk to your friends, talk to your family to gain more insight. You'll be surprised how many males and females are suffering with sexual trauma wounds. When we discuss sexual trauma, it makes a lot of us uncomfortable in our body. And when that happens, a lot of people want to steer away from the topic because it makes them uncomfortable, or you may trigger a past memory of theirs that they don't want to recall. This is why it's important to seek professional help when we're discussing sexual trauma. Not everyone is a professional and can assist you with your trauma. And not only that, they can cause more harm. They may not mean to, but they're not a clinician, so they don't understand the dynamics. So, and then a lot of people like to do, oh, this happened to me, and share, which is fine because it creates a comfortability and a safe space, but it doesn't make the situation go away, or it doesn't mean that they know how to heal the individual or what techniques are needed. With that being said, we know sexual trauma as a clinician messes with your confidence, how you feel about you speaking up for yourself. And confidence can be in your workplace, confidence can be in who you are, confidence can be in your choices, right? We also know it messes with your self-esteem, right? How you feel about your internal self, about things that you're doing, about your appearance, or in any way. Also, validation is affected, right? Because we know that most sexual trauma victims constantly looks for validation from others. Also, we know that they always need assurance, right? They always need to be reassured of something. Also, they don't know their boundaries. Most victims do not know their boundaries, so they lack boundaries. They also lack arrogance. They don't know how to stick up for themselves. They don't know how to protect themselves. So they find themselves constantly hiding. Also, they constantly have a victim mindset. What is a victim mindset? Constantly wanting to hide, constantly wanting to stay in a mood that they don't want to discuss nothing, just in a down mood based on what happened. And I'm not saying that to it be a negative thing, but we want to also get them from a victim mindset to a victor mindset, so that way they can continue with their life and propel. Also, people pleaser. Most people that are victims would tend to become people pleasers because they are suffering with all these other issues, and they don't know how to, as I say, advocate for themselves. So it's easier for them to please versus have confrontation. A lot of them don't want to have confrontation. A lot of them don't want to lose their friends or family. So they're just people please. And people please is a trauma response. Also, silence. A lot of them want to silence their voice because maybe throughout their life when they try to discuss it, or if they develop guilt and shame from it, they don't want to, people may have silenced them, or they may have silenced themselves. Like, it's better not to discuss. It's better not to bring up the topic. Confrontation, they're afraid of confrontation. They're afraid of communicating what's happening. So they avoid it. And internalize, they self-sabotage. Internalize because they cannot do these things for themselves. They start to have a self-betrayal from themselves, and they start to self-sabotage. So what does that mean? When you start to betray yourself, that means you start to put another person's needs, another person wants ahead of yours. Then you start to sabotage yourself. You may turn to drugs. You may turn to drinking. You may turn to these different techniques to help combat those strong emotions versus going to a clinician and getting the appropriate help. And not just any clinician. You have to go to a trauma informed clinician that can help you, because it is layers to these. This is not just one thing that's impacted. And as we know, trauma is stored in the body. So your body is going to respond to physical responses of the trauma throughout your life. And this is why it's being triggered. Most people will tell victims, why do you wait so long to discuss your trauma? Or why didn't you say nothing earlier? Most victims were, if they were traumatized at an early on age, and when I mean an early on age, I'm talking about like 12 and under, they haven't yet to know what sexuality is. They haven't yet reached that level of what that is. And as a kid, can you learn how to really advocate for yourself? Can you really learn all these, like how to be combative, you don't really know those skills yet, because most of the time children are being taught to be people pleasers. You know, we adjust their behavior. Say sorry, share. Oh, give your aunt a hug, or things of that nature. So they're teaching kids to be people pleasers, but without knowing what's happening. So as the child grows up and they realize, something happened to them negatively, all of these other things are impacted. And then the individual that's the victim may get blamed for what happened to them, or they may not believe them. They may not believe the victim's mindset, what happened to the victim. So they may consider, then the victim may feel guilty, feel shameful, have doubt, and create more confusion in their life. Whereas though they're constantly in their mind, because they constantly are questioning themselves. Now, when we talk about victims and sexual trauma, it's not just females based. Males can also very much suffer from sexual trauma. In fact, at this point of what I'm looking at, statistical studies, males and females at the same rate are suffering with sexual trauma at the same rate. It is not one that suffers with more. Before, it was believed that more females was more at risk, but it is many males just as much as at risk as females. It's just before, males would never report. With that being said, we need to start opening the window to discussing sexual trauma, and not making it so taboo. Because we now know most people suffer with some form of sexual trauma. Could have been early onset in childhood, could be in adolescent years, it can be in teen years, can be even an adult. These things are happening. But when it happens, we know that all of these things are impacted. And it's hard for victims to get themselves out of it. This is why, as a clinician, we work on their confidence, on their self-esteem, their validation. They don't have to look outside of them for constantly approval. They don't constantly have to, lack their boundaries to appease someone else. They don't have to constantly, silence themselves to avoid confrontation. They don't constantly have to have doubts of who they are or what happened to them. A lot of people would doubt their experience, or maybe be like, oh, maybe that didn't really happen. Then they would continue to be in a doubtful state. Some people, this will cause for other types of things to occur. This is why it's important when we're discussing sexual trauma that we know what is going on, and that we continuously work through these different barriers. And as we know, that sexual trauma is stuck in the body, so your body is going to naturally respond to the trauma. That means you're going to see it in an individual. If they're in a trauma mind state, you're going to see the individual's body physically respond to the trauma. They actually, whatever the trauma is or whatever the trigger is, their body might freeze up, or they may clench their teeth, or they may become numb, like their face may become like they just seen a ghost. Their body may be physically stuck, that they can't move because they're responding to the trauma. This stuff really does happen, and it stays with the individual. So this is how we know we have to work not just with the mind, but also with the body when we're discussing sexual trauma. And when trauma happens, we want to build a person's confidence up. We want to build their self-esteem up. We want to be able to channel all of these things so that the individual can protect themselves better now. A lot of times, a lot of victims, they never learn healthy coping skills and how to protect themselves. They haven't learned those tools. So in therapy, you teach the individual how to protect themselves, whether that's mentally, whether that's emotionally, and physically, so that the individuals can feel safe. Also, an individual with sexual trauma may also suffer with social anxiety, depending on when the trauma happened, how many times it happened, how old was you when it happened, who was you around when it happened. All of these factors come into play when we're discussing sexual trauma. It is not just sexual trauma. It's a multitude of different things. And this is why sexual trauma is an ongoing therapy, because you constantly have to work with it. And of course you can get full recovery from it, but you have to get a hold of it and really work within, so that way the victim can also feel freedom from it. no victim should be suffering at the hands of what someone else did or someone else made them do. A lot of victims may feel like, why didn't I say no? Or why didn't I stop it? And you more than likely you didn't have the information. More than likely you was taken by shock. And when things are happening, it's one thing to say, I would do this, that. But when you're in the situation, it's different. And then depending on the age you were, if you're a little kid, you may not know what those things is. You may not even relate it to anything negative until you got older. All of these things don't come into play until you get older, and you're now processing everything that is happening. And with children that have been molested early on or traumatized, they will mimic their behavior with other children. Age is never an issue with, when it comes to children and children, because they're constantly are mimicking whatever happened to them, they're going to do it to the other child. This is how children works. They may force the other child, or they may do the act, or because they're mimicking what is done to them. And I'm not blaming the children for their behavior with other children. I'm just saying what is happening. And when you see this happening, of course, address it. Don't ignore the signs. Address it. Communicate so you can see what is happening. Why is the child behaving like in this manner? So with that being said, constantly stay on guard. Constantly communicate what is happening. And when we're discussing sexual trauma, if the topic makes you individually uncomfortable to have with another person, then find a clinician to talk to. If you cannot talk to your friends, cannot talk to your family, find a healthy outlet that you can really talk to, and you can channel these emotions, because these emotions are strong and you want to be able to propel in life. You don't want all of these symptoms holding you down, because then you can develop PTSD, you can develop anxiety, you can develop depression based off sexual trauma. You can develop a drug addiction, you can develop an alcohol addiction because of the trauma. Many victims would turn to different unhealthy coping mechanisms because of sexual trauma. Some will even become hypersexual. Some may even become hyposexual. Every individual is different on how they identify the trauma, but it's important that you seek the right help so that way you know what is happening. So if you're responding to sexual trauma, really take the time out to find the resources that you need. It's not an easy fix. It is not your fault. You're a sufferer, but you don't have to remain that way. Be your own advocate. Be your own protector. Be your own voice. Learn how to stand your ground. And if you have any further questions about sexual trauma, I did an overview of what it is, but I want to further discuss case studies and things of this nature, how things are happening. Of course, I would censor certain things because certain things would probably be too much. But I'm going to also provide tools and visuals so that you understand what is happening. And children, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but children that are under the age 7 and under that experience any type of trauma will go into a hypno state. And what a hypno state is that it's completely in the subconscious, whereas though the child hasn't yet developed logic and they constantly are in a black and white phase. So it's harder for younger children. If you experience trauma in a younger age, it's harder for the processing to take place, or the healing, because it's more stored in the subconscious. You know how you say you're hardwired, your subconscious? That's what they're discussing. So I hope that was useful. Thank you for your time. Please share this video. As I say, I'm still learning as I go on as a clinician. Let me know your thoughts and share. Thank you and have a great day.